All right. So it's been, what, 2 weeks since we've been together? And so we are going to try to do a brief review. Last week, I ended on talking about Darrell Post and how he's or not last week, 2 weeks ago, on how he is a New Testament um, textual teacher. He teaches this stuff in his university, and he has done a lot of work on particularly. Yes, I am recording. It's different now that I have OBS instead of Zoom, so you don't see the green line anymore, and it won't say now recording over the speakers. Um, so he's done a lot of work on John chapter 11 specifically, and himself because of some apologetic reasons, because another teacher, I want to say Oxford, I'm sure I have it in my notes somewhere. I said it last time we were together, but they essentially said something to the effect of John chapter 11 being entirely rewritten to include Martha, I believe was the argument. And he did work on John chapter 11 to demonstrate that that was not the case. And so, what I want to do with you as we start closing out New Testament textual criticism, this section is to work through John chapter 11 with you using Darrell Post's material. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to use his slides, his material, and I'm skipping his introductory stuff because we've already covered that in our own class. And I'm skipping the end stuff because we're not actually going to do textual criticism, which is what he does at the end of the class with his students. But I'll show you the work he did do on John chapter 11. I'll do a brief review on his stuff that we covered last week, and then we'll get into the new material. So his introductory slide is Can We Know the Text? And what's really good about John chapter 11 here, we'll get to that. So he has, like I said, roughly 100 slides. We're going to use maybe or he has over 100 slides. We're going to be using 60 of them. All right. And he moves quickly through his slides, quicker than I do. So don't. Normally, I get through 12 in a class, roughly 12. So going through 60 is a lot for me, but that's because he just writes everything right on the slide and moves on. All right. So um, there were thousands of handwritten copies of the Greek New Testament, and all of them we have differences, variations in the actual wording. How then do we know with confidence the actual wording of the New Testament as penned in the first century? And this was the same kind of stuff I did in my class as well. And so he wants to bring up 4 categories. And if you remember last time we were together, I also had 4 categories. My 4 categories are different than his, but you're going to see the overlap that we're talking about the same sorts of things. He's just handling them from a different angle. So his 4 categories were words that weren't in the original text but were later additions, words that were in the original text but were wrongly omitted, words that were original but were replaced by other words, and words in which the sort order changed. So they're all there. They just changed the order in which they were written. So those are the 4 categories he has. All right. And then he says there's a difference between specific nuance and understanding. The specific nuance of a text may be impacted by some variations, like when the title of Christ is substituted for Jesus. This happens a lot in our scriptures. Jesus and Christ are interchangeable. Sometimes it says Jesus Christ, sometimes it says Christ Jesus, depending on which manuscript you're looking at. A specific nuance is slightly different, but there is still understanding, as Christ and Jesus are clearly referring to the same person. All right. There are instances throughout the New Testament where there's a specific nuance, a slightly different meaning among the variations, but there are very few places where the understanding of the text is in question because of the variations. For example, in 1 Thessalonians 2:7, right? We talked about this one in class already, but this is where one letter changes the meaning of the word, where Paul is saying that he was either gentle among them or he was babes among them, or he was as a babe among them. All right, and just one letter difference between these 2 words. What he doesn't cover here is what I covered in class, is when you change another letter and it suddenly says Paul was horses among them, right? We covered that one. So just go back to the older lesson for a review on that. Skeptics like to bring up these kinds of problems and then point out how in any particular portion of New Testament, there are far more variations in wording than there are actual words. This attack is designed to create doubt that one can even know the original words of the New Testament. Is this argument viable? We will step through John 11 as an example to test the argument. All right, so I'll go back to that slide for a second. So this is good because that's what I want to do with you in the class. I want to basically do what looks like the whole New Testament on a small scale, okay? John chapter 11 is a small scale of what it's like to do textual criticism for the entire New Testament. All right, in John chapter 11, it presents the account of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, and Christ's dramatic call of Lazarus from the tomb, and the reaction of those who saw this particular event. This account is among the most popular among those who copied John's gospel, as they would sometimes add artwork and illustrations to the story. So here he has a picture of a manuscript that also does artwork. All right, trying to get to the next slide here. It's moving slow. There we go. There are 945 words in 2 of the 3 current editions of the Greek New Testament, and a 3rd edition contains 952 words. So 7-word difference. How many variations are there to the 945 words among the 1,390 manuscripts checked? So he checked almost 1,400 manuscripts, and he collated all of the differences, all the variations. And I asked you last week, I said, how many variations do you think there are in the 1,400 manuscripts? And I told you the hint is that this is going to be a test case example of the entire New Testament. And we talked about the entire New Testament. We said in the entire New Testament, we have a little under 200,000 words, but we have about 500,000 variations. And so it works out to be about a 4-to-1 ratio. For every, as Bart Ehrman would say, who's trying to cause doubt, he would say, for every word of the New Testament, we have 4 other options, right? So you can't possibly know. So the same works out to be true in John chapter 11. We have 945 words, but across the nearly 1,400 manuscripts, we have 3,785 variations, almost a 4-to-1 ratio, where we have 4 variants for every place a word could be. And so this was perfect for me. I was like, this is a perfect test case to see what it looks like to do New Testament textual criticism on a small scale, something a little bit more bite-sized, so we can kind of understand how we end up with the John chapter 11 that we have in our Bibles today. All right, and I also told you that my 4 categories are slightly different than his 4 categories, but you'll see the overlap. So if you remember, my 4 categories are textual variants that are not meaningful and not viable, meaningful but not viable, viable but not meaningful, and the ones we're really concerned about, the ones that we have to address, are the meaningful and viable ones, right? The ones that are both likely to be original and can impact the meaning of the text. Other than that, the other 3 categories are not that big of a deal. He's going to also use those same sorts of categories when he deals with his additions, omissions, replacements, and word order substitutions, or word order, okay? Those would be his 4 categories, but they're going to fall into one of these 4 categories as well, all right? And so scribes are human, and everywhere there is a single manuscript of more than a few pages, or at least one nonsense reading. So what are nonsense readings? Well, they're neither meaningful nor viable, right? So they're in that same category. All right, some examples from John chapter 11. Bad spelling. Zazaris instead of Lazarus. Now with a double N. Mantha instead of Martha. Those types of things. Spelling mistakes. The wrong word. Mary and her sister Mary instead of Mary and her sister Martha. Okay, where they just write the same word again. A decorative letter never penned, May instead of Mary. And we talked about that. I'm not going to get into it again, but we talked about this guy right here, the Pilcrow. This happens in English, right? So in English, we have we have these decorative letters. What you see here, this is a decorative letter. This happens in Greek manuscripts as well, in which In the Greek manuscripts, they're all capital letters. There's no spaces in between the letters at all in the oldest Greek manuscripts. And what would happen is as they run into the end of the line here, they would continue the word that they didn't finish right on the next line. And sometimes they would leave a nice big space like this for a scribe to come in and do artwork. And if the scribe never got around to coming to do that artwork, you end up with this blank space here. And so where they were going to do a decorative R in the middle of the word Mary, because Mary started M-A on the first line and was going to go R-Y on the second line, and they were going to do a decorative letter for R. It was pretty arbitrary from what I can tell when they decided to do these decorative letters. The scribe never came in and did the artwork, and so they're left with a misspelling of the word Mary because the artwork was never done. That's what happened with our pilcrow. And our pilcrow, which is a paragraph mark in English, and you can see it generally on your KJV Bibles. You'll see that in that circle there. Let's see here. Come on. There you go. In this circle right here, you'll see the KJV has a pilcrow right here. You'll see it in other verse-by-verse Bibles as well. Sometimes it's kind of it's not in all the Bibles anymore that go verse-by-verse. I've seen some that don't use it. I prefer to have it if I'm going to have a verse-by-verse Bible, but this lets you know that the paragraph has started. Now, this is not how it used to be used. Because the KJV is a verse-by-verse Bible, it looks like every verse is a paragraph mark the way they've done it. And the pilcrow will always be at the beginning of that paragraph mark. But it used to look more like this. This is how paragraphs used to be done, where you would have a paragraph mark right in the middle of the line. It did not start a new line, okay? So they'd be right in the middle there. Now, what happened was, all of that artwork that you saw, the pilcrow itself became a subject of interest when scribes were writing. And so a new line was created where the pilcrow was supposed to be, and a scribe would come in later and do that elaborate artwork, like a drop cap in our Bibles today. Do this elaborate artwork for a pilcrow, and it would look something like this. They would leave that space so they could do this elaborate artwork for the pilcrow. The problem was the same thing that Darrell Post is talking about, that sometimes scribes did not come back and do the artwork. And so what we're left with is a space and an indent. And that's how we got our paragraph mark. If you are ever interested in that, our paragraphs were created because scribes didn't get around to doing the artwork. And now we have an indent and a new line. And that's how our paragraphs are now established. And we don't use pilcrows anymore because we did away with them because artwork took too long. That's what it was. All right. And so we have the same sort of thing that's happening here where he says a decorative letter was never penned. Here we go. A decorative letter was never penned. So it would say May instead of Mary because the line would start, the new line would start on the RY and the R was never done. That's just one example. He's got a bunch of them. Repeating the same clause, John 11:34, he has a manuscript that says, and he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. If you've never done that while you've been writing, you haven't written very much. I've done that so many times where I've written the same line, the same thought twice, back to back. It happens to scribes as well. And so we know that that is a not meaningful and not viable situation. All right, so many nonsense readings happen on the turn to a new page. So this is like a new line, but now it's a new page. The same word started at the bottom of a page is repeated at the top of the next page. For example, in John 11:32, he has a manuscript that says Maria instead of Maria because the bottom of the previous page said Ma, and the top of the next page should have said Ria. But instead it says Ma and Maria. So now you have a Ma Maria. Mistakenly leaving out a clause or an entire verse. This can easily happen when the wording of the word is the verse is similar, and a scribe's eyes return to the page in the wrong place. We talked about that before, homoteleuton and homoarcton, meaning the same beginning or same end. That would cause scribes to skip like that. All right. A scribe writes a word, then looks back when he's describing it. So he gives an example. John 11:24 says, Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection in the last day. In the last day. So 51 out of the 1,390 manuscripts accidentally left out in the resurrection. So this would be a case of homoarcton, where you have the same beginning. So the scribe will rise again in the resurrection, and when he looks back to write in the resurrection, he sees in the again, and instead he just writes in the last day instead of in the resurrection, skipping in the resurrection altogether and leaving a blank spot. So homoarcton, same beginning. So he found 51 manuscripts that had done that, and 8 of them were later corrected. So a scribe came in later and said, "Oh, you missed this phrase, buddy," and put it in for him. Okay? Now, this is where we started. 945 words in John chapter 11, 3,785 variants. If we remove all of the types of variants that he just talked about, how many variants do we have left, right? If we know these are obvious mistakes done by scribes, it's easy to tell what happened. They misspelt it, they double lettered, they missed a letter, they missed a phrase, things of that nature. How many are left of this? And so that's our next slide, 950. So we have 950 of those removed. Those are 950 textual variants that are removed because they're not meaningful and they're not viable. All right, but we still have a lot. And so that's where we left off last week. And he says usually his students at this point, they're like, okay, that's good, but there's still a lot of variants left. We have 2,835 variants. So let's continue. And so he continues. Greek words often include minor variations similar to English variations, such as twas instead of it was, theater with an ER instead of theater with an RE, labor OR instead of labor OUR, burnt instead of burned, or axe instead of axe with an E, right? So minor variations in spelling. All right, that's the next one. So these are all actual words. They're not like now with a double N. These are all actual words, but they're spelt differently. All right, and when your spelling isn't standardized, this happens a lot, okay? Examples, John chapter 11, we have Marian instead of Miriam, or Maria. We have Bithany with an I instead of Bethany with an E. We have Ephraim with an E instead of Ephraim with an AI, and these sorts of differences have no impact at all on the meaning of the text, and these are all viable ways to spell particular words, okay? They weren't standardized. Today, we look at them and like, well, the right is the right way and the left is the wrong way. Well, that's not how it was viewed then. In the same way, I could say honor, H-O-N-O-U-R, you would recognize that as a viable spelling instead of H-O-N-O-R, okay? These are viable spellings. They're just not standardized, okay? And common practice in copying manuscripts is including abbreviations for numbers, sacred names, and other words such as heaven, man, Jerusalem, father, mother, etc. These are variations, but should not be in the count because the meaning is the same. For examples, okay, so for example, Jesus here, this is the name for Jesus in Greek, is shortened to JS, okay, Jesus. All right. Now, what's really interesting, and then they put this line over the top to let you know that they abbreviated it. What's really interesting in this is Greek is the exact opposite to English in this, right? So imagine for a minute, in Greek, if you notice the words that are abbreviated, heaven, man, Jerusalem, father, mother, other ones will be Jesus, Christ, God. Those will all be words that are abbreviated. Abbreviations occur in the Greek writing because in their mind, to abbreviate it adds honor to it. All right, it's honorific not to spell it out. It's too high to spell out. I believe this comes from Hebrew practices by not spelling out the divine name of Yahweh, YHWH, right? Not spelling it entirely out, and then later changing it to Adonai. Altogether by not speaking it. It's too high. We have the exact opposite. Imagine for a minute if I said JC in reference to Jesus Christ. You'd be like, whoa, too common, not honorific, That's not taking it seriously. If you want to take it seriously, you spell it all the way out, right? Just opposite culture. That's all it is. Culture in Jewish Greek, don't spell it out. That brings honor to it. In English, we say spell it all the way out if you want to bring honor to it. It's funny, I say that because that's what people do in our there's a debate in our Bibles today whether or not we should use contractions. Should we say is not or isn't? Is not? Well, that's too low. That's not Bible speak. We need to say is not. But that would not be the case in Greek writing, okay? I actually think it's a silly argument, and I don't buy into it. But it is an issue with many translations. They will not use contractions, but that's a side note. Anyway, so that's very interesting. And one of the ways that archaeologists, when they actually are doing excavation and they pull up an old manuscript and they open it up, the second that they see what we call nomina sacra, or sacred names, okay, they open it up and they see this abbreviation with the line over it, they know immediately, even if they don't speak Greek or Hebrew or whatever, they're just archaeologists, they know immediately that they're looking at a Christian text because this was something Christians did. So they open it up, they see the abbreviation, they see the line over the top, they're like, oh, this is a Christian text. And they send it off to wherever it is and it gets looked at. So this is a textual variant. Some scribes would have spelt it all the way out. Other scribes would have abbreviated it. And so we have some places where the word is abbreviated and some places where it's spelt entirely out. Another one, Greek uses different prefixes and endings to a root word to communicate gender, number of nouns, and tenses of verbs. Sometimes the scribe wrongly copied the wrong form, and this is similar to English in his and her, their and them, walked and walking, this and these, okay? We talked about this more at length when we talked about the ending of Mark, how Greek word order isn't as important because their prefixes and suffixes cover a lot of the information that we're looking for in English with word order. But here, they write the wrong word. Someone, and I could see this happening in English as well, someone writing him instead of his or something of that nature. All right? The context and flow of these verses make it clear in almost every instance which form of the word was the original one, because it doesn't work. Same thing if I said it's him dog. You'd be like, that's not what you meant to say. You meant to say it's his dog, right? So it's very obvious if someone gets the wrong word, they write it wrong. These obvious examples of mistakes can be safely set aside and not included in the count. Greek has many vowels and vowel combinations with basically the same sound that may not be the same word. This is similar to English problem words, such as so, so, and so. He puts gray and gray here, which is accurate but I think it belongs on the other slide where it's a different spelling, but it's the same word. So here it's not two different words, but hair and hair are two different words, and 8 and 8 are two different words, and 2, 2, and 2 are different words. And how about the most commonly abused one, there, and there? He doesn't put up there, okay? Where, no pun intended, where we get it wrong all the time. You see people write the wrong there regularly in text messages, in social media posts, but you know which one they mean because the context is clear, right? And we love to correct it anyway, but these same sorts of things happen in the Greek manuscript tradition, all right? They write the wrong word because it's a homonym. It sounds exactly like the word they are intending to write, and we can tell by context which is the right word, so we can ignore these. All right. As a scribe would say a word in his mind and then move his hand to the new copy being made, he would pronounce the word just read and sometimes put the wrong vowel or vowel combination down because of the sound of the word is the same as mine. The problem would be much worse when working in a scriptorium where the scribe doesn't even see the text he's copying. So we often talk about an exemplar, right, where the scribe has the one he's making the copy from and then the one he's making, the copy he's making. There are some places in which the scribe never actually sees the text, when instead they have a teacher, if you will, standing in front of the class reading the text, and they're copying what they hear. And so that allows for a lot more homonym mistakes because they heard a word, especially if they're not paying attention, and they're just listening to words instead of listening to context, and they write the wrong homonym down, okay? New Testament Greek scholars who examine these differences have no problem identifying which vowel variation was the one penned by the original New Testament writer in nearly every instance. Exactly what we see happen in English, right? If I said, there's no way we can do that, and I put Theirs, you know I've put the wrong word down, right? There's no way we can do that. Can't be the possessive pronoun. So we would know in context. Same thing happens in the Greek New Testament. Sometimes a scribe would write a mistake and then immediately discover the error. Care would be taken to scratch away the ink, then write in the correct letters. In many instances, the original mistake is unknown because the scribe fixed it. Though these could be counted as differences, the scribe corrected his own mistake, and so these should be removed as well in the overall count. So sometimes the scribe's like, oh, got it wrong, corrected it, and we're like, oh, variation. Let's put it in the number. And we're like, yes, it's a variation, but he caught it and he corrected it. But it still gets added as a variation, but it's not meaningful or viable. Okay? All right. So when we started this section, we had removed 950. How many will we remove now that we've identified all these other kinds of variations? We have 1,577 total variations gone at this point, okay? So we have 2,527 we've removed. We removed another 1,500, or we started with 950. We removed another 1,577. So now we're down to 2,527 variations removed altogether, leaving us with 1,258 variations to go. Well, that's good, but it's still a lot. And people are like, it's a lot. This is good. It's much better than we thought it was, but now we still have 1,300 variants to deal with. All right, let's keep going then. A singular reading implies that there is an addition, omission, or substitution of a word or words found in only one manuscript. So in John 11:32, then Mary came to the place where Jesus was. Well, there's only one manuscript that includes the added words, the place. All right. John 11:51, it says, now this he did not say on his own authority, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for a nation. One manuscript says, but being ruler that year, instead of high priest. Singular readings are often different from nonsense readings in that they make sense, but they only appear in one manuscript and is clearly a mistake by a scribe. Okay, so a scribe has introduced a brand new reading that didn't exist there before, and we catch it, especially in later manuscripts, right? When there's no early manuscripts that show this. In late manuscripts, when it shows up as a singular reading, we know the scribe made a mistake. He thought about the meaning of the word instead of the word itself, and he wrote down something like a synonym. All right, he gave you the same sort of sense, or he wrote it in his style, like that previous one, to the place, because in his mind, that's where Jesus went. He went to the place, so he writes it down specifically. Okay, so if we get rid of those, all of those readings that are singular readings, and we started with 2,527 removals. Now, how many will be removed from singular readings from manuscripts? We're going to remove another 856 variants. Another 856 variants from singular readings. So now we're down to 402. 402 variations. We've eliminated 3,383 variants up to this point from just stuff that doesn't even mean anything, right? This is all nonsense readings at this point, or just not viable. It's not viable. So it is either meaningless or it's not viable. Okay, so here we go. He's not done, though. We're not going to stop at 402 variants. We're going to keep doing the work. All right. Sometimes scribes write words in different orders. So these are situations where the actual words are not in dispute, only the order in which they were written, which most of the time has no impact on any translation. So I have a long section on this, but I'm not going to do it for the sake of time. But in John 11:44, it says, and he who died came out bound hand and foot with grave clothes. Most manuscripts actually read foot and hand, But in English, we would naturally put hands before feet. So all English translations read hand and foot. I'm going to stop there for a second because what he says here is not entirely true. All right? So I fact-checked everything before I teach it, and Darrell Post is way smarter than I am, but nobody's perfect, okay? There are multiple translations that actually render it the same way the Greek render it. The LEB, the NET, the YLT, the LSV, the CEB, and the Dewey Reams all say foot and hand instead of hand and foot. However, if all he did was look at the most popular translations, then he's right. ESV, CSB, NIV, KJV, NKJV, you name the very popular ones, then he's absolutely right. There's no translation that says foot and hand. They all say hand and foot, okay? Now, why is that? Why is it that formal translations don't put foot and hand, generally speaking? And functional, I get the functional ones. Why don't they do it? In English, and I'm going to just make this really short. I have a pretty long section on this because I wanted to explain to you how this works in English. But in English, we have something called binomial pairs. All right? And when we use binomial pairs in English, we do not change the word order. That's why it's always tick-tock and not talk-tick. It's why it's click-clack and not clack-click. And it's why we do things like hand and foot and not foot and hand. And there's 100 linguistic things that are going into our minds that we're not even aware of. It's in our subconscious because of the way we hear it. And so we will always say things like hand and foot, generally speaking, not foot and hand. We won't say all of those other things that I said as well. Those are called binomial pairs. It also happens when, I have ding dong, not dong ding. That's in my notes, okay? It's the way we speak naturally. You don't even know you're doing it half the time. You're not aware that this is an English thing, and yet it is. And so when translators are translating, they do know it's a thing because they have to make a decision. Do we do natural English, hand and foot, or do we do what was in Greek, foot and hand? Well, what's interesting is there are some Greek writers who switch the word order, and they go hand and foot as well. Does it make a difference on the text? No. But it is a difference, whether it's foot and hand or hand and foot. It doesn't matter, okay? So now, 273 manuscripts, he says, have the word order switched, okay, out of the 1,390. Now, we had 402 variants left. Let's take word order variants out of the equation. Word order variants. How many are we left with? 327. So we're down by about a third of the variations, okay? 2/3 of the variations are gone, but 327, still kind of a lot. Darrell's not done. We're going to keep going. All right. The remaining 327 variations among manuscripts of John 11 are represented by the three remaining kinds of changes: omissions, additions, and substituted words. These are either easy to solve or they have minimal impact on the meaning. Okay? There are 175 examples in John chapter 11 where some manuscripts lack a word or words that were a part of the original text of John 11. Only a few of these prove hard to resolve, and none impact the understanding of the text. Why would a scribe omit words? These are the kinds of examples, or these are the examples of omitted words found to be copying mistakes, easily explained by scholars. Okay? So now we're getting into more of the meaningful and viable changes. Okay? Conjunctions. These are small Greek words translated then, and, but, frequently begin sentences, but can be omitted by a scribe when they think about the content being copied and forgets about to write the conjunction. So there are some cases in John 11:13 where it says, but Jesus spoke concerning his death, but is omitted by 6 manuscripts. So it's not a singular reading. 6 manuscripts have this happen to it. Okay? But we understand exactly why it happened, okay? Sometimes you forget to add that conjunction at the beginning of a sentence. Definite articles. Greek frequently includes the definite article the before proper names. We've talked about this multiple times in this class. The Peter answered and said to the Jesus. We don't talk that way, but that's how it is in Greek. In copying manuscripts, this definite article is frequently omitted or added before proper names, and adding to the count of variations. Now, the Jesus had not yet come into the town. 11 manuscripts omit the word the. Again, not singular readings, but there you go. Words that seem extraneous. Any scribe familiar with Greek can accidentally omit a word that seems extraneous. For example, Jesus said to them, "Loose him and let him go." In Greek, the second pronoun is not needed as it is in English. And often in such a phrase, only one pronoun would be written. All the earliest copies include the second pronoun, and then it dropped out. So before it's, so you could say in Greek, "let him" and "let go," and that's totally viable. And Greek people would understand what was said, but it's in our earliest manuscripts, so it gets omitted. You won't see it reflected in any translation because it's not how we talk in English. Manuscripts tend to grow in length due to the very nature of the Greek language, and it is elastic use of extraneous words. So it might be, we have implied pronouns in English, right? If I say, "go get the milk," I'm actually saying, "you go get the milk," but I don't need the "you" in English. We understand it. Same thing can happen in Greek. So they have that it's masculine in the word answered. They don't even need the word he. So you might get answered in the masculine sense, and it's he answered. But a scribe will come along later and then make it explicit and write the word he in. And now you have he answered. And then you might have a scribe come in later and say, "Oh, contextually, because we're writing a lectionary, and the lectionary isn't going to give us context, we're going to actually make it explicit." So Peter answered. Okay? And then because of language change over time and grammatical structures change, they get even more explicit. Peter answered and said. And why would they add the "and said"? This is actually really interesting, is what we're seeing. Remember, no punctuation in Greek, right? And so how do you indicate that the quote is going to start? Well, later Greek says, well, the way you get the quote to start is by adding "and said." Write the word "said" before, and then the following words are the quote. And so you'll get now later Greek manuscripts, because of grammatical changes, they'll say, "Peter answered and said." And then they might say later, well, we actually need the word "saying." Okay? So language changes over time. It happens in Greek, and this is an example of it happening in Greek. So later manuscripts will then say, "Peter answered and said, saying," and then the quote. And you can just see how this keeps growing over time, which is why we tend to say that texts tend to grow, not shrink, generally speaking. And so we have manuscripts like that. There are 87 examples in John chapter 11 where multiple manuscripts have added a word or words that are not accepted as part of the original text of John's gospel. Why would a copyist add words to the text? There may be a few examples in the New Testament where additions were done for theological reasons, but most, as in the case of John 11, were accidental. Situations where words naturally flow, often the scribe rehearsed the words in his mind, perhaps while putting the pen back in the inkwell, and ended up not penning the additional words not found in the original text. And there are several examples of this in John chapter 11. John 11:41, Jesus lifted up his eyes. Notice his in italics, meaning that there's no pronoun at all in most Greek manuscripts. 123 manuscripts add the pronoun because it seems to fit naturally. But where did Jesus lift up his eyes? The text doesn't say, but 173 out of 1,390 manuscripts say "unto heaven," because Jesus goes on to address the Father. So you see an expansion in precision. Jesus lifted up his eyes unto heaven, okay? Does not change the meaning of the text, but it is a variation. So 31 manuscripts added both his eyes as well as unto heaven, okay? Here's one. Now, 5 manuscripts add the word that naturally seems to belong. Now, when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, saying, "Lazarus, come forth," right? Instead of just cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." Occasionally, there are situations where it becomes difficult to determine if a word was legitimately in the original text and later copies wrongly dropped it out, or perhaps it was never in the original text and some later copies wrongly added it. Most examples of these additions found in John 11 are easy to resolve. There are 65 examples in John 11 where some manuscripts display a completely different word in a place of a word found in other manuscripts. A couple of these differences do not affect the specific nuance, but none affect our do affect the specific nuance, but none affect our understanding of the text. The vast majority of these are easily explained by scholars as to which wording is likely the original. So John 11:4, when Jesus heard that, he said, "This sickness is not unto the death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be gloried through it." 6 late manuscripts changed the title to Son of Man. They might have had Mark in mind, since Mark uses that phrase more often than anybody else. But even so, this does not impact the understanding of our text. We know that the Son of Man and the Son of God are the same person, different titles. All right. And so it could have a slightly different theological meaning to it, depending on how much weight you want to put on these titles as far as distinctions. But we understand 6 scribes made a mistake late and said Son of Man instead of Son of God. All right. Sometimes the scribe copying will replace a proper name for a pronoun and write the pronoun where the original manuscript had a proper name. Then from that day on, they plotted to put him to death. 3 late manuscripts swap out that pronoun and say, then from that day on, they plotted to put Jesus to death, right? Usually adding precision. Sometimes the scribe copying will replace a word with something with another term that refers to the same thing. So here it's just a question of swapping out the feast for the Passover. Since the Passover is a feast, these are the same sorts of things. The meaning is not altered. 33 manuscripts swap out feast for the second mention of the Passover because it had already been mentioned before. Now, when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet. All right, so it's all at, but which Greek preposition? Greek prepositions are more flexible than English ones, and so they could use different words for the same action: toward, to, or upon, or by, right next to his feet. All right. Darrell has said at this point he's become so familiar with the manuscripts that he can usually guess which variation of these pronouns is going to be in which manuscript. Because he's so familiar with the scribes that do them, he can see these situations come up. I thought you have to be very familiar to start getting to that point where you're like, I bet you they use ace there. And he goes and he goes, yep, they certainly do. All right. So he's laying out the last category. Here, John 11 has 57 verses, 945 words. There are 327 additions, omissions, and substitutions supported by at least a few manuscripts. But in order to concern us, these differences would have to be difficult to resolve and affect the meaning of the text. So those that are left, difficult to resolve and meaning of the text. Of the 327, how many do we have those that are difficult to resolve and affect the meaning of the text? Here we go. Come on, slide. There we go. 5. We're down to 5 out of the 945. I'd started to go through this in my own work just to see if I could see if our translations reflected this. My CSB has 1 of the 5 that he recognized in the footnotes. The NKJV has 1 of the 5 as well. And the NKJV lists 3 or 4 others we've already resolved because it's outdated information. The Lexham Critical Commentary has 3 of his 5 that he has. And so we'll overview these 5 next week because I'm out of time. So next week we'll cover the last 5. We're down to 5 out of the nearly 4,000 variations that are difficult to resolve and impact the meaning. See, we can have confidence in our scriptures that we have what it is. We'll deal with these last 5 next week. You all are dismissed. Thank you.